views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, it's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to journalists and editors and writers and filmmakers, photographers. This evening we have an author who is going to join us a little bit later on in the program. But we're going to start out talking with a reporter who we have not met before, and we're going to meet her virtually. She works for both amNewYork and the Bronx Times Reporter. And so it is my pleasure to say good evening to Alejandra O'Connell-Domenech. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
You were going to say meet you, but of course we're so far away. Who would know? Anyway, so you do work for those publications right now, but let's just talk about you and your background, where you're from, and when and why did you get into journalism?
Well, I'm originally from Kentucky, and I moved to the city to pursue a master's degree in journalism about 5 years ago. And, I had always had an interest in journalism, but didn't pursue it, in college, and was really just kind of thrown into it when I came to the city.
So this is, of course, a striking thing. Here is a woman from Kentucky coming to New York City, and not only just kind of getting a job and working, but being thrust into real life here. Number one, how long ago was it? And number two, what is that like? What are your impressions? I love getting impressions of people who really come from somewhere else about what's going on here.
It was about 5 years ago. It was tough. I mean, I had always wanted to come to the city, and so it was, kind of like a dream come true for me to finally be able to move away and to come up here. But it definitely was a culture shock. But but the city's definitely grown on me, and now I can't imagine myself really anywhere else.
Well, I guess you're like all of us who grew up here in New York and in the Bronx. I can't imagine living. Believe me, I know that there's issues, and you do too. My theory about the Bronx has always been, you could go down any block and there's a story there. But what kinds of things have you found here that you find inspiring about working here and doing journalism here?
I mean, I think just that, like I run into a million stories every day. I mean, not actually a million, but I run into a ton of stories every day. I mean, you take, a walk down the block and you just look around, and there's so much life and there's so much energy that, so much happening that, you're never bored, and there's always like some story to tell. Everything has a story. Every person has an interesting story.
You're talking like a New Yorker. I really appreciate that. Anyway, let's just talk about, you have done a lot of writing, especially of late, about education. And of course, in this day and age, that means reopening or not, or what. So let's just talk a little bit about, can you put some definition to what's going on? Because I think it's just all over the map. Some schools are reopening, some schools are not. Some parents say yes, some teachers say no. It seems, and I don't have children in the public school system now, but it seems chaotic. So can you give us an overview of what you see?
I mean, that's a pretty good summary already of reopening, that it's just kind of a complete mess. I mean, the school year was supposed to start on September 10th, and amid mounting pressure from parents and teachers and principals and the other school administrators that were calling for a delay to in-person learning. The mayor delayed the start of the school year until the 21st, but we know that today was the start of remote learning, but there's still a whole bunch of questions that remain unanswered. People still have questions about whether or not it's still safe to go into buildings because of, questions with proper ventilation, questions with proper, personal protective equipment, staffing issues. schedules. Some parents don't even know what their children's schedules are.
My
So a
goodness.
lot is still kind of up in the air, and people are also being, and by people I mean parents and teachers, are being left in the dark by the city that still don't have answers or haven't given answers to a lot.
Or a real plan. Leadership is a big issue here, and I think everybody can see that. But what's interesting is you provided, like a reporter, you told it like it is. The solutions are hard to come by. I guess that was what the issue is. What do you hear from either parents or teachers or both about what they're thinking?
About in terms of a solution?
Whether they should open the building, whether they should go in the building?
I mean, most people that I speak to, parents or teachers, don't feel comfortable. They recognize that it is better for students to be in a classroom learning because there's a whole bunch of problems also with remote learning, as people have already experienced in the spring. But there's just too much that is still unanswered, that they don't feel that it's safe to return to buildings. I mean, there are teachers that sat outside of school buildings earlier this week in protest because they felt that it was safer to teach outside than it was inside of their own classrooms. And that speaks volumes to how much trust there is between teachers and parents in the city.
I have some information here that's worthwhile. This was a list, which I can show, that I pulled. Somebody had posted it online, of all the schools in the city where somebody had tested positive, where staff members had tested positive. So number one, you think about the staff members that tested positive, but then number two, you have to think about all the people that they were with maybe in a school building, and certainly the offices that they were in. It gets very complicated. So out of this long list, I can list very quickly, PS 150 in the Bronx, PS 154, PS 130, PS 70, PS 56, PS 215, PS 536, the Walter Damrosch School, Passages Academy, Mid-Bronx Early Childhood Center. I mean, this is a very, very serious kind of situation. But what I want to ask you specifically, what's it like to cover it? How do you get to people to talk to? Do you have to meet them in the street? Do you get referrals? I mean, I'm always interested in, especially for this program, a journalist's process, especially during the pandemic. It would seem to me to be a terrible challenge.
I think that I've been lucky enough to have people respond actually a little bit more quickly to me during the pandemic, because people are kind of forced indoors and are always glued to their phones or looking at some sort of a screen. And so I reach out to a lot of people on social media. Sometimes I've met people outdoors. I tried not to do that, given that we're still living in a pandemic, and I try not to, associate with people that I haven't been quarantining with. But I think that also a lot of parents and teachers, because they don't have answers, are very willing to speak to a reporter, because they recognize that really the only way that they can get answers is through us, through journalists. So it's been surprisingly, easy to find parents and teachers that want to speak to me.
I'm going to tell you something that you will understand in a similar way. Now, I don't do the kind of field work that you do, but for this program, while it's a challenge because I'm not in a studio and I can control the space better and, interact and look guests, right in the eye, et cetera, it is easier to get guests because everybody's home. If I want to get an elected official, can you tell me when you can do 20 minutes? And at some point during the day, they don't have to come to the studio. They sit right in front of their computers. Do you have a feeling about what's going to happen, or is that too difficult a question to even address? I get the sense that they're going to try all they can to get kids in school, but there's going to have to be some compromise, whether it be outdoors or something.
Yeah, I know that it seems like that Mayor de Blasio and Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza are very, very set on having students return to buildings on the 21st. But I think that the number of teachers that are going to just kind of refuse to go into buildings. I mean, I can't predict the future, but it seems like there's going to be there. This is a fight that is far from over.
One of the issues that did come up is this idea of dual teaching. And I know the UFT came out about it. I saw a big story about it in Florida that they're fighting over whether a teacher should have to stand in front and do the Zoom thing at the same time they've got students in the classroom. It would seem to me that that's dead on arrival. I can't imagine, especially with the UFT being as strong about that situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a huge issue that that school communities have been really concerned over, because there's the obvious math problem of like, how can school staffs basically can't split themselves into more than one person to teach them like remotely and in person. And the city did say that they were going to bring in like 2,000 additional teachers to help with like blended learning challenges, but both the principal and the teachers union say that falls very, very short, and that there should be at least 8,000 more. And
I have to interject about that. It's very easy to say you're going to bring in 2,000 new teachers. I would like to know where those teachers are going to come from. And if I'm a principal, I'm not bringing people into this difficult situation who I don't trust and know. So that's why I laughed when you said that.
Yeah, that's an important question too. I think that some of the new teachers are going to be substitute teachers. Some of them are going to be other DOE employees that have some sort of credentialing that don't work in classrooms, but then they're going to be brought into classroom environments to teach. Kind of like, it's another kind of like emergency scenario. But that kind of still remains up in the air.
Listen, Alejandra O'Connell-Domenech, thank you so much for joining us. You have actually underscored and defined what is the best about this program. Somebody from the outside covering the Bronx and right in the middle of one of the most important issues of our day. And we're going to look forward to reading more about what you're going to be reporting, especially as this keeps going in both amNewYork and the Bronx Times Reporter.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great, thank you. Folks, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, an author who wrote a book that is contemporary, and it's really an excellent, speaking about kids, an excellent book for children to understand who they are, especially as regards their ethnicity. So we'll do that when we come back. Don't go away.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronx, this is Trans.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and I'm real excited about this particular segment because it's a little bit different than what we talked about the last time. But what is similar is we're talking about young people and schools and how we're going to bring them up and educate them properly. And so what better way to handle it than go to a teacher who's at the South Bronx Classical Charter Schools, and it is teacher and author Nicholas Stanton. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Stanton.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so interesting hearing author at the end of my name now. I'm so used to just teacher, but now it's teacher and author.
Well, so that brings us right into it. This is your first book?
Yes, this is my first book, my baby, Corey Corbin and the Perfect Paint. I've been working on it for a little over 2 years now, and I'm glad that it's finally out and published to the public.
I'm going to get into the book. There's, as I mentioned to you before the show, there's a lot of personal interest I have in the subject, but I do want to just kind of introduce you to people. So let's start with your interest in education and being an educator, and then how did we move to a point where you wrote a book?
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for asking that. It's a great opportunity to speak a little bit more about myself and why I'm so passionate about education. I am a lifelong Bronx resident. It makes me feel right at home to see the castle on the Parkway behind you. A great book about DeWitt Clinton High School, as that's my alma mater.
Oh, mine too.
Really? Look at that.
I'm older than you, I'm sure, class of 71.
Okay, yeah, no, class of 2012, but it was a great educational experience there, and I wanted to give back and turn key to younger scholars in the Bronx because the Bronx has so much to offer. And with there being a lack of equity and inclusion and diversity in education, I really wanted to put that at the forefront, especially with all of the social issues going on in the world right now. So I myself am biracial. My mother is Irish and my father is Hispanic of Puerto Rican descent. And so growing up, I really struggled with my identity, and I felt like I had to choose if I was going to be Irish or if I was going to be Puerto Rican. And later in life, I learned that I can celebrate both parts of my identity because they are what makes me me. So I wanted to write a book with a very similar message for people that might be facing a similar struggle.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to hear that you're a DeWitt Clinton graduate because it means we have a lot in common. And before we even go further into the book, I think people would want to know now, South Bronx Classical Charter Schools may have different resources than the traditional public schools. How are you doing, and are you reopening? Will you be reopening? Are you going to be doing virtual? How's it going to work?
Yeah, it's a very interesting time right now for education. A lot of people in the education world are waiting, unfortunately, for the effects of politics. We're kind of playing a waiting game to see what the Department of Education will be doing. And it's also a mix because we're private. So we're following somewhat of the guidelines from the state, but also doing our own thing. I'm proud to say that South Bronx Classical has already been in operation for 3 weeks now. So our scholars have been receiving remote instruction for about 3 weeks now. But they do have the option, if they opt in, to come back into class starting on Monday. So I've been teaching for 3 weeks now over my laptop, but as of Monday, I will be back in my classroom with a 12-to-1 ratio. And if parents elected to keep their scholars home, they can continue to receive like quality instruction via Zoom, or they can have their scholars come in person.
I love how you call them scholars, folks. He teaches kindergarten to 4.
Yeah.
So if we look at children at that level to start, then they have a chance. All right, let's talk about Corey Corbin and the Perfect Paint. So I'm going to tell it. This is a story of a little girl whose identity is challenged and throughout her life, and it kind of reveals to her that, wait a minute, there is something like, that's my daddy, but we don't look alike, and everybody's like, that guy, he's your daddy, you know. And it's for a young girl, it's a challenge. And then, of course, why don't you tell what the ultimate solution for her is?
Of course. So
and how we, go through the story.
Yeah, so it, like you said, it follows her journey throughout school. And what is a crucial part of the story is it happens all throughout art. And I find that in education, unfortunately, sometimes funding in the arts is the first thing to be cut or the last thing to be allocated. So it was crucial that this happened through art to show that the outlet of the arts, be it visual or music, really provides a healthy outlet for expression for these young kids in this crucial part of their life. So she uses art to learn how to mix colors through paint. She herself is mixed, so she learns the beauty of her color, not only to see her color, but also to celebrate it.
And you really explained what I think is so important perfectly, and that is the value of art in our schools. So yes, we'll teach math, we'll teach science, we'll teach social studies, we'll teach about relationships. But what really helps children grow is some sense of expression, some way to express themselves. And here she was mixing the paints. And say, wait a minute, and the teacher said all the right things. We're made up of all different colors. It was just beautiful. Talk to me about the level of writing. Now, many children's books, you can get the whole story and just flip the pages and see the pictures. This one, you got to read it. So presumably you're working with children who may be a little bit older. Want to just talk about what your thinking was?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. As far as the grade level appropriateness, I think I would use this book for any of my scholars from kindergarten to 4th grade. I think that this book could be read to them and taught to them, or on the flip side, it could be read to themselves if they were at that 3rd or 4th grade level. So the lexicon is a little bit more advanced, but at South Bronx Classical, we pride ourselves on really challenging and pushing our scholars. So I find that the lexicon and the word usage is suitable, but also can be challenging, but we want to push our scholars towards that.
One of the things when you put stuff out, which I do every week, you want to get feedback. Has the book been out enough for you to get feedback, or we're still on the early stages and you haven't had a chance to do that?
No, that's a great question, and I thank you for asking it. So I have been fortunate enough to receive some feedback from some really key people in the industry. So the Chief Executive Officer of Democracy Prep Public School, which is another large charter school network here in New York, has quoted, and I quote, "It's a sweet tale of innocence and desire for representation. Corey Corbin and the Perfect Paint is a required reading for children and adults alike." So along with Natasha, I've had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Robert Harvey, who works with the Harlem Children's Center, and other people within the industry for diversity and inclusion. So it has been really well received, and I can't wait to see what this journey holds for me.
You talked about yourself as the original inspiration for it. Therapeutic for you in some form?
Yes, very, very cathartic.
It was when you got it done, you were like, wow, this tells the story.
Yeah, it was so interesting to see it come to fruition, because for so many years I was only able to see it through my own eyes. So writing it through this character, Corey Corbin, really opened the door for me to fully express it through somebody else's eyes. So it was a really interesting process, and I've worked with an incredible illustrator. I would be nothing without them. Her name is Natasha. She's incredible. I found her online, and we just had a beautiful story. She's also from the Bronx. So we worked together for this, and it was just a passion project for the both of us.
What I want you to do after the program is give the name of Natasha and the contact info to our producer, our great producer, Rebecca Hemick, because I want to invite her on the show and let her show us some of the illustrations that she's done. If she's from the Bronx, she's in. It's good that you brought her up, because I wanted to ask you about the illustrations. The illustrations are detailed. Was the process that you sent her the book and she drew it, or you were kind of writing it and she provided visual inspiration for you along the way?
Yeah, along this book, our relationship has grown so much, Natasha and I. It was a bit of both. We kind of worked hand in hand. I sent her the book initially, and she gave me her ideas. I gave her mine. Although I teach art, am not the best drawer, if you will. So I gave her my sketches on pieces of paper, and I sent them over, and then she was able to really interpret them alongside the words and make what now is a masterpiece.
In terms of that process and then what you saw, I have to tell you, I think it's better to work with an illustrator, unless you're real good. But you kind of, as a creator, you get lost in your own thing. You know what I mean? And so I think that you probably did the right thing. Now, do you see this as a process where you are going to, now you did this, you're going to write another one? Or was this kind of the one statement that you wanted to make and say, well, I've made it, I've done it, that's what I'm going to do? Or did this inspire you to say, oh, I can do this stuff?
That is so interesting, because along the way, I think had you asked me that a few months ago, I would have said, this is it. This is the one. But along the way, I realized that the conversation that this book sparks is much larger. So I think that because of the lack of representation in children's books, this has fueled me to want to write more, not only for Corey, the protagonist in this particular story, but also for other underrepresented groups.
Now, would you write about something different that you think children need to understand, or are you going to, kind of pursue this line of discussion because, for obvious reasons, and it is important for young people?
I think that my very next book will definitely be about something completely different. I, in my classroom, work a lot on mindfulness, and I think that the conversations go hand in hand with identity and mindfulness. So I think that the next issue that I will be tackling in my next book, which is to come, who knows, BronxNet heard it first. Nicholas Stanton's next book will definitely be about mindfulness and how that can impact a scholar in education.
And one last thing from me just about Corey Corbin and The Perfect Paint. You know, with everything going on right now, and it seems like for a teacher, let's say in a social studies class or really anywhere, it's a great jumping off point to say the nature of race, the nature of ethnicity, so that children who are seeing the news, who see their parents involved, can get their arms around what is equality, what is fairness. And so I think you've done just a wonderful, wonderful job here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, hearing that from somebody like you that graduated from the same high school and loves the Bronx just as much as I do. It means a lot, so thank you.
Oh, sure. Listen, my vision of the Bronx, and I'm sure you share it. I mean, if ethnicity bothers you, you really got to find another place to be, because you're not going to be able to ride the elevator in your building and get to the lobby without meeting people from all over the world. So listen, people can get it on Amazon. They can get it on all the sites, right? And it's just, educators, please take a look at Corey Corbin in The Perfect Paint, and certainly people interested in ethnicity and how it plays in internal families. It's a wonderful book for them all. Nicholas Stanton, thank you so much. And we hope to have you back for the next book or before. And let's get that illustrator on the program too.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Folks, we're going to see you next week on the Bronx Buzz. And for Bronx Talk this week should be a very interesting program, actually, about education. We're going to bring in 4 college students, all connected to the Bronx, who are in different places, remote learning, in a dorm, and we're going to find out what their lives are like. We'll see you then. Good night.